3 one-month-old golden retriever puppies were tied to a rusty fence left to die under the burning sun. No one stopped, no one cared, until a broken man with nothing left to live for heard a cry that shattered the silence. What he did next will leave you speechless. But the real shock, it wasn't just the puppies who were saved that day. It was him too. Would you have done the same? In Greenville, South Carolina, the heat didn't just press down from above. It radiated up from the cracked pavement and baked clay, like an oven turned upside down. The kind of heat that made breathing feel like swallowing smoke. It was late July, and not even the cicadas dared to sing under the white-hot sun. The sky was pale and empty, bleached by the relentless blaze. On the outskirts of town, near an overgrown salvage yard riddled with rusted metal, faded tires and broken appliances, the world stood still, and in that forgotten corner something moved. Barely. At the far edge of the yard stood an old pecan tree, long dead, its trunk split with age bark, peeling like ash from a dying fire. One of its lowest branches stretched crookedly over a patch of dry, weed-choked ground. From it, tied with 3 lengths of rough splintering rope, 3 golden retriever puppies no older than a month hung limply in the brutal heat. The ropes had been looped around their tiny forelegs and shoulders, creating makeshift slings that suspended their small bodies just 5 feet above the ground, high enough that their paws couldn't touch earth, low enough that their suffering was meant to be seen. They weren't barking. They no longer had the strength. The smallest one, a pale cream-colored pup, with soft fur that curled slightly around the ears, swayed gently in the hot air, unconscious or close to it. A darker golden pup hung still, eyes glazed but half open, his breath quick and shallow. The third, the largest of the trio, had a coat like warm honey and tried weakly to lift his head whenever a gust of heat stirred the ropes. All 3 were near the edge, held there by cruelty and silence. No one had come. No one had noticed. The man who had done it, a stooped old figure with eyes fogged by dementia and pain, had arrived earlier that morning in a sputtering blue pickup, its back filled with junk and cardboard. He parked beside the tree, without urgency. He stepped out barefoot, mumbling to himself in broken syllables, and carried the puppies in a tattered towel. With hands that trembled from age or madness or both, he tied each pup to the branch without looking them in the eye. He didn't cry, didn't smile. He wiped his brow, climbed back into the truck, and drove away down a road that hadn't seen kindness in years. A few neighbors saw him. One man from across the field paused while checking his mailbox, frowned, then went back inside. A woman watering a potted cactus on her porch shook her head, but said nothing. In this part of Greenville, people had learned that survival meant looking away. Trouble passed faster if no one invited it to stay. Elsewhere in town, Eli Ward was walking for no particular reason. At 45, Eli had the build of a man who once worked with his hands. Tall, lean, roped with quiet strength, but time had worn him down like riverstone. His jeans hung loose around his hips, and his T-shirt bore a faded logo from a mechanic's garage that had long since closed its doors. His boots were scuffed, and his face, once open and approachable, now carried the settled lines of sorrow. A beard-streaked gray framed his chin, and his eyes, ice blue and thoughtful, rarely looked directly at anyone anymore. He had been a good man once. Respected, he ran a successful auto repair shop and coached his daughter's softball team. But grief rewrites men. 2 years ago, Eli's wife Marla collapsed on their front porch with a stroke and never opened her eyes again. Their daughter Mira, only 16 at the time, reacted with rage. She drank, stole, vanished for nights at a time. Now she was locked in a juvenile correctional facility 3 counties away for shoplifting and assault. She hadn't spoken to him in 8 months. Her last letter ended with a single line: "Don't write me again unless you're ready to be a father." Eli had stopped writing, He didn't know how to be anything anymore. That morning, restless and suffocating in his empty house, Eli left. He walked with no destination through tired streets and broken intersections, past strip malls filled with more vacancies than stores. He passed a church with weeds in the cracks of its steps, a closed barber shop with a handwritten "Gone Fishing" sign that had yellowed into permanence. Eventually his path took him past the salvage yard. He might have missed it if not for the sound, a whimper, thin-strained, barely audible. At first he thought it was just heat messing with his ears, but then it came. Again. He froze, turned his head. A third time. Eli crossed the road, climbed over a fallen "No Trespassing" sign, and stepped cautiously through the dry weeds and scattered hubcaps until he reached the tree. His breath caught in his throat. 3 puppies, hanging from the branch like forgotten toys. Their bodies sagged from the ropes, their fur clumped with dust and dried saliva. Flies buzzed near their ears. The smallest one, cream-colored and light as air, let out another broken cry and then went limp again. "Jesus Christ," Eli whispered, already moving. He reached up to the lowest pup first, the golden brown one with unfocused eyes, and supported its weight with one hand while sawing through the rope with the pocket knife he always kept in his back pocket. The rope snapped, and the pup dropped into his shirt. Eli gently set him on the ground and moved to the next. The cream-colored one came down like a bag of feathers. Eli caught him and held him longer. His heart was racing, not from effort, but from something else, something like panic or rage. The third pup, the largest, was heavier, eyes wide and alert despite everything. As Eli cut the rope, the pup tumbled forward and instinctively growled a tiny rasp that shouldn't have sounded so protective. Eli caught him too and stared down at the 3 of them lying now at his feet, breath still shallow, still fragile but alive. He pulled off his shirt and wrapped them inside, cradling them against his chest like fire. He couldn't let go out. The walk home was a blur of heat and urgency. His boots kicked up clouds of red dirt. His arms ached, but he didn't care. All that mattered was that the small bundle in his arms still moved. When he reached his house, a modest one-story with peeling paint and a porch swing that hadn't been used since Marla died, Eli bypassed the front door and headed straight to the garage. It still smelled like sawdust and old tools. He hadn't stepped foot in there in over a year. Her gardening gloves still hung by the workbench. He spread out a blanket and laid the puppies down. The cream-colored one curled immediately against the darker one. The third, the alert pup, didn't close his eyes. He watched Eli unmoving. Eli sat down beside them. The concrete was warm, the silence even warmer. "You weren't meant to make it through this," he whispered, "but here you are." He didn't know what would happen next, didn't know how to feed them properly or whether they'd even survive the night. But as he watched their tiny chests rise and fall, he felt something stir in him that hadn't moved in years. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was something close. The light was beginning to fade in Greenville, South Carolina, and the oppressive heat of the day gave way to something quieter, something slower, an exhausted stillness that wrapped itself around the streets like a blanket no one wanted. The sky was streaked with amber and dull pink, and in the garage behind Eli Ward's house the day's dust had begun to settle. The 3 puppies he had pulled down from the tree now lay motionless on the floor, each wrapped in a corner of the worn flannel blanket he had dragged from the back of a closet he hadn't opened in years. The garage still smelled faintly of motor oil, lavender detergent, and something dry and ghostly old memories trapped in sun-faded wood. Eli, now stripped down to a sweat-stained undershirt and jeans, knelt beside them. The concrete pressed cold against his knees, a contrast to the lingering warmth radiating from the day. He hadn't planned this. He didn't know what he was doing. But something in his hands had remembered how to move gently. and something in his heart had remembered how to keep things from slipping away. The smallest puppy lay closest to his right knee, a pale, cream-furred thing with curls like down feathers around his ears and tiny lashes dusted with dirt. His breathing was light and rhythmic now, no longer the fractured gasp of earlier. His body was warm against Eli's palm, but still fragile, like something that might float away if he looked away too long. The second pup, a rich brown-colored boy with oversized paws and ears that still flopped comically forward, had taken to chewing on the edge of Eli's jeans, even in his half-drowsy state. Every now and then, his tail would give a twitch, not wagging, but trying. His nose was darker than the others, wet again after hours of dryness, and he made a faint snuffling sound when he was curious, which apparently was every time Eli moved, even slightly. The third pup was lying apart from the other two, darker golden fur blending into the edge of the blanket. He wasn't asleep. His eyes were open, alert, and strangely focused. Unlike his siblings, he didn't twitch or fidget. He watched. Every time Eli moved his hand or shifted his weight, the pup's eyes followed, with quiet calculation. There was something unnerving about it. This tiny animal looking at him like he was more than a man, like he was being evaluated. Eli sat back on his heels, wiped his brow, and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "All right," he murmured more to himself than to them. "I guess we can't just keep calling you. Hey, you." He looked at the smallest still curled against the blanket. "You," he said gently. "You're Sonny." He reached down and touched the pup's soft fur. "Because that little bit of light in you, it made me stop, even when I didn't want to." He turned to the brown one, who was now attempting to crawl unsteadily toward a nearby can of nuts he'd left on the floor. Eli chuckled. "You're trouble," he muttered. "Benny." "Yeah, that fits." The pup gave a soft yip and then rolled onto his side feet, kicking in slow motion. Then Eli's eyes met the gaze of the third pup, the quiet one. He hesitated. There was something in that look. "And you're hope," he said finally. "Because you're not giving up, and maybe I shouldn't either." The names felt strange on his tongue, but good, like finding a rhythm after years of silence. He stood slowly, joints creaking, and stepped over to the old metal shelf by the door. Digging through a box of mismatched supplies, he found an unopened can of wet dog food, dented and long expired, but still usable. He opened it with an old-fashioned key, spooned it onto a plate, and carried it over to the puppies. Sonny stirred ears, flicking. Benny immediately stuck his nose into the dish. Hope waited, eyes still locked on Eli, until the man sat down beside him again and offered the plate. They ate cautiously at first, then hungrily. It was quiet in the garage, save for the soft sounds of tongues and paws and sniffs. Eli didn't speak. He just watched, let them be. When they finished, all three curled up again, their bellies slightly rounded, breaths even. It was only then, as the sun's last rays slipped behind the rusted roof tiles, that Eli noticed the letter on the old workbench. It had been sitting there since spring, a draft he never mailed. The words were short and uneven, scrawled in pen that had nearly run dry. "Dear Mira, I don't know what to say anymore. You said not to write until I'm ready to be a father. I think maybe I wasn't ready before. Maybe I failed. But something happened today, and for the first time, I didn't walk away. 3 tiny things left to die. I saved them. I want to try to save us too. Love, Dad." Eli picked up the letter and stared at it in the fading light. Then he reached into the drawer and pulled out a new envelope. He rewrote it slower this time. Cleaner, steadier. He told Mira about the pups, about the branch, about the heat. He told her their names. He didn't know if she'd write back. He didn't know if she should, but he needed her to know that he hadn't given up. Not entirely. Outside, the wind began to pick up. Night in Greenville was different from the day cooler, yes, but lonelier too. It had a way of making silence feel thicker. Eli stood by the garage door and looked out over the overgrown grass and empty street. He held the envelope in his hand, like it weighed more than it should. Then he turned back to the garage, where 3 tiny lives slept soundly on a blanket that still smelled like the past. He set the envelope on the counter, turned off the light, and sat beside them again back to the wall. He didn't need to be anywhere else. Not yet. Not tonight. Late August had a different flavor in Greenville. The air was still hot, but not cruel. The wind returned in small pockets, threading through the pecan trees, with dry whispers. At Eli Ward's house, something had begun to breathe again. Not loudly, but enough to notice the garage that once held only the scent of rust and silence, now had the musk of fur, the occasional tinkle of food bowls, and the padding of tiny feet skidding on concrete. It was not joy exactly, but it was movement, and for Eli, that was a start. He stood by the garage door, hands in his pockets, watching the 3 puppies with a tired gaze that softened when Benny tripped over his own paws and skidded into a pile of rags. Sonny, the smallest, lay curled beneath the workbench tail, twitching as he dreamed Hope, ever observant, sat near the threshold. His head tilted at the slow-turning fan, as if measuring its purpose. The pups had settled into the garage like they'd always belonged there, and Eli, for reasons he couldn't explain, felt no urge to push them out. He spent his mornings cleaning the garage with more care than he had shown anything in years. The shelves were dusted, the corners swept, even the cracked window panes were wiped down. In the past, he might have muttered about wasting time, but now the act of caring, even for something small, felt like a kind of rebuilding. He found himself humming sometimes, though he stopped the moment he noticed. That Thursday morning, as he sorted through a box of old blankets, a bark from Benny drew his attention toward the gate. He stepped outside in time to see a woman pushing it open, with her hip arms loaded with 2 grocery bags. She moved slowly but firmly, the way someone moved who didn't ask permission for much. It was Rose Callahan, a 62-year-old widow who lived 2 houses down. She was tall and thin, with a hunched back that hinted at years of bending over hospital beds or garden rows. Her skin was pale, worn thin by grief and sun, and her silver hair was tied in a clip that looked too small for the job. Her dress was faded, her sandals practical, and her gaze sharp. Rose had once been a nurse, good at it too, by most accounts. But she'd left that world behind after her husband Franklin passed away. Since then, she spoke little to the neighbors, but when she did, her words came wrapped in flint and honesty. You feeding those dogs hope and good intentions, or you planning to give them something with protein? She asked, barely glancing at Eli. I've got kibble. Eli replied, Good. Now you've got more. She handed over the first bag. Dry food puppy formula and wet food in case their teeth are lazy. Then she lifted the second bag. Topical ointment for the little one's burns, his front legs still raw. You didn't have to, Eli said. Taking both bags carefully, I didn't. Rose agreed, but I did anyway. You'd be surprised what a little help can do before pride gets in the way. Rose entered the garage like she owned the place and crouched slowly near Sonny, who blinked sleepily up at her. She rubbed ointment onto his leg with the steadiness of someone who'd done this before, and the puppy relaxed under her touch. Benny attempted to chew her sandal, which earned him a side-eye and a muttered, Bold. Aren't you? That's Benny, Eli said from the doorway. The small one's Sonny. The watchful one is Hope Rose. Looked at Hope, who sat completely still. Smart one, that one, she murmured. Looks like he's already learned disappointment. Eli didn't answer, just leaned against the frame and let her work. I had a dog once, Rose said, without prompting. A mutt. Big Ears loved to chase bees. She applied another layer of ointment. Her voice. Even I lost him when Franklin got sick. Couldn't take care of both. Had to pick one. She paused. Sometimes I wonder if I picked right. She stood with a grunt and dusted off her dress. I'll be by again next week. Those pups won't raise themselves. And you. She fixed him with a glare, softened by understanding. You look like you could use a reminder that breathing doesn't mean living. After she left, Eli sat on the back step with the pups at his feet. He opened the bag of food, filled their dishes, and watched them eat with clumsy gratitude. He didn't know what he was doing, but for the first time, it didn't feel like failure, just effort. That night, with the pups curled in their corners, he sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. The letter came slowly, like pouring something thick from a bottle that hadn't been opened in years. Dear Mira, I'm not writing because I figured everything out. I haven't. But today, someone brought food for the puppies. A neighbor I barely speak to. She called me stubborn, and I guess she's not wrong. The pups are growing. They each have their quirks. Benny won't sit still. Sonny naps on my boots. Hope watches everything like he's seen too much for his age. They don't ask anything of me, but somehow they're giving me more than I deserve. I don't know if I've changed, but I'm not where I was. And maybe that matters. Just wanted you to know, love, Dad. He folded the letter and set it on the hall table. 3 days later, the mailbox creaked at noon. Eli opened it with a practiced indifference, but the handwriting on the envelope stopped him. Cold, uneven, familiar. He carried it inside and opened it with both hands, as if afraid it would vanish. You name them. I don't know why. That makes me cry. But it does. I'm not sure what I want anymore. But I'm tired of being angry. I miss Mom. I miss home. Can I come back? If you still want me, Mira. He read it twice. Then again, he tucked the letter into the pocket of his flannel shirt and stepped out into the garage where Benny was chasing his tail. Hope stood alert by the door, and Sonny lifted his head from Eli's boot with a yawn that ended in a hiccup. Eli didn't say anything, but inside, something finally loosened. The days in Greenville had begun to shorten, though the heat hadn't caught on yet. The late summer sun still blazed across rooftops, and the breeze, though more frequent now, still carried the weight of dry earth and memory. On Sycamore Lane, things had settled into something resembling a rhythm. Eli Ward cleaned in the mornings, fed the puppies by noon, and spent his evenings scribbling partial letters he never mailed. Sonny, Benny, and Hope had turned the garage into a miniature world of chaos and healing. But that rhythm, for the first time in weeks, was about to falter. It started with the sound of an engine. It was mid-afternoon when Eli, standing shirtless on the porch with a bucket of soapy water and an old broom, heard the slow crunch of tires over gravel. He looked up and saw a black SUV, new sleek tinted windows, pulling to a near stop at the end of the block. It didn't belong to anyone in the neighborhood. Most folks here drove rusted pickups or second-hand sedans. This one was different. It didn't park. It just lingered. The SUV sat idle for a minute, engine humming before slowly rolling past Eli's house. As it did, the rear window rolled down an inch. Eli glimpsed a man behind the glass white, maybe in his early 50s, square-jawed, clean-shaven, wearing aviator sunglasses and a tailored charcoal shirt. He didn't smile, just stared. Eli raised a hand in greeting, more instinct than invitation. The SUV didn't stop. It drove down the street, turned the corner, and vanished. He didn't know it yet, but that was Carl Maddox, a senior enforcer for Champion Pure Breeds, one of the state's largest, most controversial dog breeding operations. Carl had once been a Marine, and it showed in the way he stood shoulders back, spine straight. Stillness in every movement. His reputation in the dog world was cold and clinical. Not the breeder himself, but the one who handled problems quietly, efficiently. Problems like unstable litters, dogs that didn't meet expectations. Carl never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He had the presence of someone who knew precisely how far fear could reach without shouting. That evening, Eli couldn't stop thinking about the car. He wasn't one for paranoia, but something about the man's stare stuck with him. Too still, too long. The kind of look that carried weight. At dinner, Sonny refused his usual bite of canned chicken and instead lay near the door ears twitching toward the darkening street. When Eli turned out the lights and sat on the back step with a lukewarm beer, the pup began to whimper softly, head buried under a blanket. It wasn't just nerves. It was warning. Eli looked out into the yard which stretched toward the alley and a broken fence overgrown with thistle. The wind rustled the tall grass, but nothing moved beyond that. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Later that night, after the puppies had fallen asleep and the hum of insects blanketed the street, Eli sat in the living room, going through a shoebox of papers he hadn't opened in nearly 2 years. It had belonged to Marla, his wife. A mess of clipped coupons, receipts, greeting cards. Her handwriting, curving and hopeful, still lingered on most of it. He hadn't gone through this box since the funeral. He hadn't wanted to. He was about to put the lid back on when something caught his eye. A folded invoice near the bottom, slightly yellowed at the edges. He opened it slowly. It was a receipt. Champion, Pure Breeds date. April 11th. Items: nutritional supplements, early training aids, pre-evaluation blood screening. Paid $650. Name on the shipping label: Franklin Maddox. Eli stared. Franklin Maddox. That name rang faint bells. He flipped the invoice and found a printed return address. Same city the SUV had turned toward, same zip code as the badge on the man's shirt sleeve. He placed the receipt down, heart suddenly thudding faster than the fan overhead. Why would Marla have this? Why had she hidden it? The next morning, Eli walked to the corner store to mail a package for Rose and to pick up a fresh sack of feed. On his way back, he passed Mrs. Keene, the elderly woman with pink curlers always planted in her porch chair. She waved him down. "Eli," she said, voice thin and reedy, "I meant to tell you yesterday. There was a man here in a suit. Said he was looking for a man with dogs. Asked what kind they were. I told him I wasn't sure. Golden something or other. He wrote it down." Eli paused. "Did he give a name?" She shook her head. "Didn't ask. But he had cold eyes. Not the kind you want to see twice." That evening, Eli moved the puppies inside the house. The garage had been good enough before, but something had shifted. He didn't trust the dark anymore. He cleared space in the laundry room, laid fresh blankets, and put up a baby gate at the hallway. He also checked every window lock and for the first time in years pulled the shotgun from the hall closet. It wasn't loaded, not yet, but he cleaned it anyway. That night, as Eli lay on the couch with the television flickering silently and Hope curled against his feet, he caught sight of movement through the front window. Only a flash, like someone slipping behind a bush. He stood quickly, heart in his throat. But when he opened the door, there was nothing. No sound, no trace. But Sonny, barely awake, whined softly from the laundry room and nudged closer to the door. It was just past midnight when the trouble returned. The street was silent. Greenville had curled into sleep save for a few porch lights left burning like watchful eyes. The air was heavier than usual, saturated with a thick humidity that stuck to the window panes and settled into the corners of rooms like old dust. Inside Eli Ward's house, the only sound was the soft ticking of the wall clock and the occasional whimper from Sonny, who had taken to sleeping beside the laundry room door. Hope lay near the front window, alert, but calm, while Benny snored softly beneath the kitchen table, his belly rising and falling like a metronome. Eli had fallen asleep on the living room couch, an open book face down on his chest. He hadn't intended to sleep there, but since moving the pups inside, he found himself more comfortable staying nearby. Even with doors locked and the shotgun cleaned and waiting, there was something about the air outside that made his spine itch. Something unspoken and unfinished. His dreams that night had been restless. A blur of footsteps in fog-distant barks and the echo of Mira's laughter from a time when her voice still carried joy. It was Sonny who heard it first. The small golden puppy stirred ears twitching, head lifting just slightly. A sound barely audible scraped against the edge of silence. It wasn't the creak of a branch or the rustle of a raccoon. It was deliberate. Weight on gravel. Slow calculated, Sonny let out a soft whine. Hope's ears snapped up instantly. The older pup stood quiet but tense. His posture, rigid head aimed toward the side yard. Benny, still sleepy, gave a single bark and tumbled out from under the table tail, wagging uncertainly, before instinct pulled his expression into something more serious. Eli blinked awake just as Sonny let out a high-pitched yelp. A moment later, a soft metallic click echoed from the side of the house. Eli sat up straight. Not a car, not wind. A gate latch. He moved fast. By the time he reached the kitchen door, the puppies were clustered at his heels, barking in a chaotic chorus. Hope's barked deep and controlled Benny's high and erratic. Sonny's urgent and raw. Eli grabbed the shotgun from the corner, but didn't point it. Instead, he flicked on the porch light and threw open the back door. There, standing in the yard with one foot already inside the perimeter, was Carl Maddox. He wore black from boots to jacket to gloves. A dull gray cap was pulled low over his forehead, but Eli recognized him instantly. Same square jaw, same dead stare behind cold eyes. His posture was casual, but not relaxed, like a man used to moving through doors that weren't his. The faint gleam of something metallic clipped to his belt. Maybe a knife, maybe something worse, caught the porch light just enough to make Eli tighten his grip on the shotgun. "We don't have a misunderstanding," Eli said, stepping forward slowly. "You're trespassing." Carl tilted his head slightly. "Didn't knock because I didn't want to wake the dogs." Hope growled low in his throat. "Impressive," Carl added, glancing at the pups now forming a line between Eli and him. "All three. Especially that one." He pointed at Hope with a slight nod, his tone devoid of praise. "That one's got control." Eli didn't move. "You need to leave." Carl's smile never reached his eyes. "You're sitting on government property. Those dogs especially. The dark one are part of a restricted breeding program. Should have been terminated." "They're alive," Eli replied, "because I found them tied to a tree. You people threw them out like trash." "Which means they were discarded," Carl said flatly. "Not yours to save." From across the street, a porch light flared on. Then another. A shadow moved behind Mrs. Keene's curtains. The neighborhood, normally still at this hour, had begun to stir. Carl looked up, then back at Eli. "Loud little army you've got there." "They're mine," Eli said, voice low but steady. "And if you set foot here again, you'll regret it." Carl stepped back, hands still at his sides. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be." "Mr. Ward, think about your daughter." Eli's jaw tensed. The mention of Mira felt like a line crossed. "I am." Carl lingered for half a breath more, then turned and walked back toward the alley. Not hurried, not nervous, but watched by 3 dogs who never stopped barking and a man who had run out of things to fear. When he was gone, Eli shut the door, slid the bolt, and knelt down in front of the puppies. They circled around him like a returning heartbeat. He placed a hand gently on Hope's back, and the pup leaned into him with silent assurance. Eli didn't speak, but inside something shifted. He understood now this wasn't about dogs anymore. This was about choosing to fight for something that couldn't fight for itself. The next morning, Eli pulled a large storage bin from the attic. It was full of old holiday decorations and children's books long untouched. He cleared out the guest bedroom, swept the corners, and changed the sheets on the twin bed that hadn't been used in over a year. He opened the window, let the breeze carry out the dust, and hung the photo back on the wall. A Christmas picture of him, Marla and Mira, taken 3 years earlier. They were smiling. Mira wore reindeer antlers and held a mug of cocoa. Marla's hand rested on Eli's shoulder, and the whole room felt warmer, just having that image on the wall again. Later that afternoon, Eli sat at the kitchen table, sorting through a few more of Mira's old things. He found her sketchbook full of messy, vibrant pencil drawings of dogs, trees, and imagined creatures with wings. On the inside cover in Marla's handwriting, it read, "For Mira, who always sees the magic first." His eyes welled unexpectedly. That softness his daughter had, was it still there beneath the hurt? Then the phone buzzed. A short, simple text appeared on the screen. "They're letting me out early. I'll be home this Friday, M." He stared at the message for a long moment before replying, "Room's ready. We are too." That night Rose stopped by, unannounced, her hair tied back and a covered pot in hand. "You look like someone who didn't sleep," she said, setting the pot down on the stove. "Someone came by." Eli replied, "Not to visit." She raised an eyebrow. "The suit." He nodded. "You want me to call a friend at the station?" she asked. "Not yet," he said, "but keep the number handy." Rose leaned against the counter and watched as Sonny climbed onto Eli's foot. Curled up like it was the only place in the world that mattered. "You know," she said, "a dog doesn't stand in front of you unless he's sure you're worth guarding." Eli nodded. His voice came quiet, but certain. "I know." And now so did Carl. The morning sky over Greenville was steel gray, the kind that gave no clue whether rain was coming or the clouds were just deciding to hang low for drama. Eli Ward stood in his driveway, a travel mug of black coffee in hand, his eyes fixed on the old street sign at the corner, like it might tell him something the map didn't. Hope sat beside him, tail thudding softly against the pavement, his ears flicking toward every passing car as if memorizing their sound. Eli had barely slept since Carl Maddox's midnight intrusion. He'd spent the past 2 nights rechecking locks, moving tools to the front porch, and reviewing everything he knew about champion purebreds, which wasn't much until last night when he found the invoice in Marla's papers, the one with Maddox's name, and the trailed address, 1453 Slate Ridge Road, somewhere west past the industrial parks and farm supply warehouses, nestled between forgotten fields and even more forgotten buildings. Today he planned to drive there. Rose Callahan insisted on coming with him. She showed up at 9:00 a.m. sharp, wearing jeans, a flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, and a navy baseball cap with a faded hospital logo. In one hand she carried a canvas satchel, in the other a thermos that smelled suspiciously like black licorice tea. "You drive," she said, tossing Eli the keys to her truck before he could object. "You're the one with the shotgun license." Her truck was old, but solid, painted the color of rusted copper, and filled with small trinkets. A rosary wrapped around the rearview mirror, a cracked dashboard compass, a tiny plastic dog glued to the console Rose drove like she did everything sharp and with no apologies. Slate Ridge Road wasn't on any official GPS system, but Rose had grown up in this county and knew back routes even locals had forgotten. After 40 minutes of silence and radio static, they pulled into a gravel lane lined with skeletal trees. A rusted iron sign stood crooked at the entrance, half sunk into weeds. Champion, purebreds, private property visitors by appointment. Only Eli stepped out first. The place looked abandoned. The main building was a large 1-story cement block structure with boarded windows and a slanted tin roof. Behind it, what remained of several long kennels stretched toward a tree line. Cages tipped and fencing partially collapsed. They walked slowly, the air thick with stillness. A padlock on the front door had been busted. Someone had been here recently. Eli pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and the scent of old bleach. Fluorescent lights flickered weakly overhead. The main lobby had once been painted blue, but time had drained it into gray. Stacks of forgotten clipboard shipping invoices and training charts littered the front desk. A broken ceiling fan creaked slowly, though there was no breeze. Rose headed toward a cabinet in the corner and began rifling through drawers like she'd done this before Eli moved to the inner office. The desk had been cleared recently, but in the back corner behind a loose panel near the floor, he found a cardboard box wedged between the wall and a dead filing cabinet. Inside were folders stamped with red ink, batch D17. He opened one and read slowly. Breed Golden Retriever, Line Bred Classification Elite. K9 Training Candidates Batch Code. D17 Disposition. Evaluation. Unstable notes. Nervous behavior under early socialization conditions. High-pitched vocalizations. 2 failed bonding trials. Recommendation: cull to avoid reputational risk. Attached to the report were 3 photographs. One of Sonny Still with rounder features sitting in a plastic tub, one of Benny tongue-out, eyes bright, and one of Hope already alert and poised even as a pup Eli's throat dried. The language was clinical, cold. But what struck him wasn't just the decision. It was the silence around it. No medical issues, no real aggression, just imperfections. And someone had decided that was enough to throw them away. Rose appeared in the doorway, holding another envelope. "You need to see this." It was a printout of an internal memo signed by Carl Maddox. To Handling Division from C. Maddox. Subject: Batch D17. Disposal Authorization. Directive: Execute end-of-week termination plan. Quietly, no digital record ensure physical files are locked. Post-disposal. Reason breeder evaluation. Failed expectations. Unstable lineage suspected. Slate has already replaced the batch for upcoming rotation. Eli didn't respond. His jaw clenched so hard it ached. They took the box. Every file. Every page. Back at Rose's house, they spread the evidence out across her dining table. She brewed coffee strong enough to peel paint and spoke without emotion. "We give this to the county first. Then the press. I know a girl who freelances for the Ledger, used to work for the Tribune till they cut local budgets." Eli nodded, still staring at Hope, who had followed them home and now lay on the rug at his feet. They were just babies. They didn't even fight back. Rose sipped her coffee. They didn't have to. They waited for someone who would. That afternoon they filed the complaint at the local county clerk's office. The clerk, a young woman named Lana Brooks, wore rimless glasses and a cardigan with cat buttons. She took one look at the folder and narrowed her eyes. "This is substantial," she said quietly. "Do you have backup copies?" Rose handed her a flash drive. 2 more off-site. "If this goes missing, we're not going with it." Lana nodded slowly, placing a confidential stamp on the top of the complaint. "We'll notify the state's Agricultural and Animal Welfare Board. You may get a follow-up." As they walked out, Eli stopped by the bulletin board in the hallway. Among the public notices and lost dog flyers was a poster for Veterans Legal Aid of South Carolina. He stared at it a moment. "I think I'm done being quiet," he muttered. That night back at home, Eli fed the pups early and sat outside on the porch. The sky was cloudless, now deep blue, turning to purple. Hope lay at his side, and for once even Benny was still. Inside Mira's room waited, and now so did Justice. The morning sun hit Greenville with a crisp sharpness that made everything look cleaner than it was. Dust on porch railings, cracks in driveways, and the faint traces of summer's long heat all shimmered under that early light, like a half-forgotten memory. At the edge of Sycamore Lane, Eli Ward stepped outside with a mug of lukewarm coffee and a mind full of tension. The pups were already awake. Hope sat by the front door, tail curled neatly, eyes alert. Benny was pawing at the screen with restless energy, while Sonny paced near the gate, his ears twitching with unease. Eli had sensed it too. Trouble didn't always come with a warning. But sometimes when the air held too still, when the wind avoided certain windows, you just knew. By mid-morning it arrived. A black SUV pulled up across the street, followed by a gray sedan. Both vehicles parked slowly, deliberately. The driver doors opened in unison. Carl Maddox stepped out first, dressed sharply in a navy blazer and pressed trousers, dark sunglasses hiding his expression. He was flanked by two figures, a woman in her 40s with iron-straight posture and a binder tucked under her arm, and a tall, pale man in a cream-colored suit, with the confidence of someone who thought the law belonged in his pocket. The woman was Tina Harlow, legal representative for Champion Pure Breeds. She had an angular face, severe cheekbones and thin lips painted in a bloodless shade of mauve. Her voice, when she eventually spoke, would prove to be precise and cold, trained, not warm. The man beside her was Ray Coulter, a private enforcer with a background in asset recovery. He had a shaved head, a long scar down his left temple, and the easy posture of someone used to walking into tense spaces with no fear of being challenged. They didn't knock. They stood at the sidewalk like invaders waiting for a banner of surrender. Eli stepped down from the porch slowly, Hope and Sonny trailing at his side. Benny had darted to the gate tail, stiff, unsure whether to bark or bite. Carl raised a hand in mock greeting. "Mr. Ward," he said, "we're not here to argue. We're here to settle this." Legally, Tina Harlow opened the binder and drew out a folded sheet of official stationery. "This is a formal claim of ownership," she said, her voice clipped and emotionless, "filed under state statute regarding improperly retained genetic assets. Batch D17 falls under Champion Pure Breed's intellectual property umbrella. You are currently in possession of 3 animals that legally belong to our client." Eli took the paper, but didn't read it. His grip crumpled the edge. "They were abandoned," he said. "I found them half dead." "Doesn't change their origin," Tina replied, "or the fact that they were not legally released." Ray Coulter shifted his stance, his fingers brushing the edge of his belt where a retractable leash clip hung beside a thick plastic case. "We'd prefer to do this without causing a scene." From the porch, a voice broke the standoff. "I think it's already a scene." Mira said she had arrived unnoticed, stepping out from the side of the house with her backpack slung over one shoulder. At 17, Mira looked older than she should have, taller, leaner, but her eyes still carried the storm of a girl who'd once been soft. Her hair was darker, now cut just below the jaw, and her denim jacket was too big. Sleeves rolled twice to fit. She had Marla's intensity and Eli's stubborn chin. She stood halfway between the driveway and the porch hands, curled into fists at her sides. "This is our home," she said. "You don't get to decide who belongs here." Carl gave her a brief glance, calculating, but said nothing. Hope stepped between Mira and the strangers. Without being prompted, Sonny took his place beside Eli. Body low, ears forward, a soft growl building in his chest. Benny barked once, loud and high-pitched, his entire little body quivering with nervous fury. Tina adjusted her blazer. "We will return with enforcement if this isn't resolved." "You go ahead," Eli said, folding the paper slowly. "Bring whoever you want. But when you come back, understand this. These dogs have a name now. They have people. You left them to die." "We didn't." Carl's sunglasses stayed on, but something behind them flickered. Disappointment, or perhaps calculation. "This isn't finished," he muttered. "No," Mira answered. "It's just beginning." They left without another word. The SUV and the sedan reversed slowly, tires crunching gravel until the street was empty again. Eli stood motionless for a long while. Mira walked to his side, her hand brushing against his, hesitant. At first, then firm. He didn't look at her, just whispered, "You really came back." She nodded. "I had to." Later that evening, after the tension had settled, like dust on furniture, Eli and Mira sat in the kitchen. The pups lay curled at their feet, Hope half on Mira's sock. Sonny pressed against Eli's shin. Benny sprawled belly up like he had forgotten every law of gravity. "I kept that room the way you left it," Eli said, pouring her a cup of tea. "Except I changed the light bulb." Mira smiled faintly. "I saw the photo on the wall." "You were wearing antlers," he said. She nodded. "You were smiling. Mom, too." There was a pause. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "So am I," he answered. Outside the night was still, but it didn't feel lonely. The porch light hummed, the breeze stirred the curtains, and from the backyard, no longer a place of fear, came the steady rhythmic padding of feet, a pack at peace. Fall came gently to Greenville. The air lost its summer bite, and the trees began to whisper their change in color. The sidewalks were scattered with golden leaves, and the sky carried that strange combination of light and wind that made people look up for no reason at all. But on Sycamore Lane, something more important had shifted. The press conference came first, held outside the county courthouse with reporters from the Greenville Ledger and a few state networks in attendance. It was brief, but final. Behind the podium stood Sheriff Colton Avery, a wide-shouldered man in his late 50s with a gravel-thick voice and a natural distrust for lawyers. His uniform was neat, and his words were deliberate. The facility operating under the name Champion Pure Breeds has been shut down, pending full investigation. We have confirmation of multiple code violations, destruction of protected records, and unethical breeding practices in violation of state and federal guidelines. A warrant has been executed for the arrest of one Carl Maddox, and charges filed include trespassing, intimidation, and animal endangerment. At the back of the crowd, Eli Ward stood beside Rose Callahan. He wore a button-down shirt and jeans. Nothing fancy, but he stood taller than he had in months. Rose, holding a thermos of bitter tea, nodded once as the cameras flashed. "Looks like he won't be sneaking around backyards anymore," she muttered. Eli didn't smile, but his eyes said enough. Later that week, the county arranged an adoption event for animals rescued from the facility. The building itself had been gutted. Kennels, torn down, papers, seized medical equipment sold off. But the dogs, many of them shaken, but still trusting, had a new chance. It was there that Benny, the ever-energetic pup with a nose for knocking things over, found his boy, Caleb Harmon, was 8 years old, with dark curls and a quietness that ran deeper than shyness. Diagnosed with a severe speech delay and selective mutism, Caleb often sat in corners during social events, hands clenched, shoulders hunched. His mother, Natalie Harmon, a petite woman with kind brown eyes and worry lines that suggested too many sleepless nights, had almost turned around to leave when Benny broke away from his handler and galloped across the park lawn like a rocket. He didn't bark. He didn't jump. He just sat tail, swishing eyes wide right in front of Caleb. The boy stared. Then slowly he reached out a hand, and Benny pressed his wet nose into the boy's palm. Natalie burst into tears on the spot. A week later, Benny had a new home and a boy who spoke his first full sentence in public just to say, "That's my dog." Hope, on the other hand, had always belonged to someone who didn't know she needed him yet. It was Rose who realized it. One quiet morning, as she sat in her backyard garden, the frost beginning to edge the basil leaves, Hope had stayed with her, while Eli focused on rebuilding life with Mira. And over time, the silent golden pup became her shadow. He followed her from porch to tomatoes, from kettle to kitchen window. He never made noise unless she left the gate open too long. One afternoon, after she scolded him for chewing through her broom handle, he dropped his head into her lap, and she laughed an honest, belly-deep laugh, the kind she hadn't let out in over 10 years. That was the moment she knew he wasn't just visiting. Hope stayed, and that left Sonny. Soft-eyed, cream-colored Sonny, with a heart stitched full of healing, had always gravitated toward Eli and Mira. He had a way of sensing tension, of curling into Mira's arms just as her shoulders began to tighten, of laying across Eli's boots the moment his hands began to tremble from old memories. It was Mira who suggested it first. "You know, he's like a therapist," she said. "Maybe we could make it official." With help from a friend of Rose's in social work, they registered Sonny for animal-assisted therapy. Within a month, he was visiting the local mental health center once a week, helping veterans' children and anyone whose wounds weren't visible. He would sit patiently through sessions, resting his chin on trembling knees, anchoring people who thought they had floated too far. One morning, a therapist named Dr. Andrea Sims, a black woman in her 40s with dreadlocks tied into a low bun and a voice that always felt like being told a story, leaned down and whispered to Sonny, "You've got a calling, sweetheart." He wagged his tail once in reply. As for Eli and Mira, home began to mean something again. It wasn't fast. Healing never is. Some nights they didn't speak much. Some mornings Mira would disappear into her sketch pad while Eli worked in the shed building new furniture he didn't need. But they were there, under the same roof, breathing the same air, learning each other again. The photo on Mira's wall had faded slightly, but it remained a snapshot of a time before loss. Now no longer a symbol of grief, but of return. That evening, just as the first gold of October settled behind the rooftops, Eli stepped out onto the porch with a blanket draped over one shoulder. Sonny padded behind him, yawning with dramatic flair, and Mira followed a hot cocoa in her hands. They sat in silence for a while, just watching the leaves tumble across the street. Then Mira did something Eli hadn't seen in what felt like a lifetime. She laughed. It was soft, quick, triggered by Sonny sneezing into his own tail. But it was real, and when she leaned over, wrapped both arms around Sonny's neck, and buried her face into his fur, something unspoken passed through the air, like a benediction. Eli looked up at the sky, then back down at his daughter. Her arms locked around the dog who'd once hung between life and death, and he knew each of them had been saved. Not just the dogs, but a girl, a father, and a home that had once gone quiet. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. They come on 4 trembling paws in the form of a second chance, wrapped in fur silence and unconditional love. This story reminds us that even what the world calls broken can become whole again, that a forgotten soul, whether it's a lost dog or a wounded daughter, still matters deeply in the eyes of God. He sees what others abandon. He lifts what others leave behind. Maybe you're going through a time where hope feels small, or maybe you're carrying wounds no one else can see. But just like Eli, Mira, Sonny, and the rest of their little family, your healing may already be on its way. Quiet, unexpected, and real. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Comment. Amen if you believe that no one is too forgotten for God to find. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and may God bless you and everyone you love today.